Have you ever wondered who the very first people to call the Americas home were? For a very long time, schools taught a single, straightforward story about brave hunters crossing a frozen bridge of land from Asia. It was a simple tale, one that seemed to explain everything we knew. But history is like a great river, always moving and revealing new depths. What if I told you that this simple story is only one small part of a much larger, more complex, and far more exciting saga? What if the roots of humanity in the Americas run deeper and spread wider than we ever imagined, reaching all the way back to the continent of Africa? This is a journey into the untold story of the Americas, a story that is being rewritten right now by incredible new discoveries. We are living in a truly remarkable time, a moment when science and history are coming together to challenge old ideas and open our minds to amazing new possibilities. Archaeologists, armed with new technologies, are digging deeper into the earth and uncovering evidence that pushes back the timeline of human presence in this hemisphere by tens of thousands of years. These discoveries invite us to ask bold new questions. Who were these ancient peoples? Where did they come from, and how did they get here? The answers are leading us on an incredible intellectual adventure, one that connects the continents in ways that were once dismissed or ignored. It's a story that belongs to all of us, a shared heritage that is finally coming to light. This exploration is not just about dates and artifacts. It's about people. It's about understanding the incredible resilience, ingenuity, and courage of our most distant ancestors. Imagine small groups of people navigating a world that was vastly different from our own, a world of towering glaciers and strange giant beasts. Their journey was not a single event, but a long, unfolding epic of survival and settlement. By looking at the evidence with fresh eyes, from ancient rock art in Brazil to mysterious skulls found in Mexican caves, we can begin to piece together a more complete and colorful picture of our collective past. This new understanding honors the diverse origins of the people who first shaped these lands. So I invite you to join me on this journey of discovery. Let's leave behind the old, familiar maps and venture into uncharted territory. We will explore the evidence that suggests the first Americans may have included people of African and Australoid descent, long before any other group arrived. We will learn about the scholars and scientists who dared to question the established narrative and followed the clues wherever they led. This is more than a history lesson. It's a quest to uncover the deepest roots of the American family tree. And like any good family story, it is full of surprises, mysteries, and profound connections that remind us of our shared humanity. For many decades, the story of the first Americans was told with unwavering certainty, and it began in the far frozen north. The theory, known as the Bering Strait or Clovis First Model, painted a vivid picture of a small band of pioneers. According to this tale, around 12,000 years ago, during the final chapter of the last ice age, big game hunters from Siberia and Asia walked across a massive land bridge called Beringia. This bridge connected modern-day Russia to Alaska, a vast, treeless plain exposed because so much of the world's water was locked up in glaciers. These people, the ancestors of today's Native Americans, were said to have followed herds of woolly mammoths and other megafauna into a new, uninhabited world. This narrative was supported by a specific type of evidence, beautifully crafted, fluted spear points first discovered near Clovis, New Mexico in the 1930s. These Clovis points were found all across North America, and for a long time, they were the oldest confirmed artifacts on the continent. Archaeologists believe that the people who made these tools spread rapidly southward, populating both North and South America in a relatively short amount of time. The Clovis First theory was neat, tidy, and powerful. It became the bedrock of American archaeology, presented in textbooks and museums as the definitive account of how the Americas were first settled. It was a story that held sway for nearly a century. The idea of a single migration event was appealing because of its simplicity. It offered a clear starting point and a single origin for all the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Scientists could trace the path of these early hunters from the icy north down through an ice-free corridor that supposedly opened up in Canada, allowing them to move into the heartland of the continent. The Clovis people were depicted as expert hunters, a super predator culture that swiftly conquered a new hemisphere. For generations, any discovery that seemed to contradict this timeline was often met with skepticism or dismissed as a result of flawed dating or natural phenomena mistaken for human activity. The Clovis First model wasn't just a theory, it was dogma. However, even as this story was being solidified, some quiet but persistent questions began to emerge from the fringes of the scientific community. A few archaeologists found strange tools or campsite remains that seemed to be older than Clovis, but their findings struggled to gain acceptance. How could people be in South America at the same time or even before they were in North America if they came from the north? How did they travel so fast? These nagging inconsistencies were like small cracks in a great wall. They hinted that the straightforward story of the Bering Strait crossing, while certainly an important part of the human journey, might not be the only story, or even the first one. The powerful grip of the Clovis First theory began to loosen as archaeologists unearthed a series of astonishing discoveries that simply could not be ignored. These were not just whispers from the past, they were loud, clear voices telling a different story. All across the Americas, from the icy reaches of Canada to the arid landscapes of the United States, sites emerged that were thousands of years older than any Clovis artifact. In the Old Crow Basin in Canada's Yukon Territory, scientists found animal bones that had been intentionally broken and shaped by human hands. When these bones were dated, they returned an astonishing age of around 38,000 BC, pushing back the timeline of human presence by more than 25,000 years. This was not an isolated case. In the American Southwest, another site sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. At the Oro Grande Cave in New Mexico, not far from where the Clovis points were first found, researchers discovered human-made tools and campfire remains deep within the cave's layers. The dates from Oro Grande were just as stunning as those from Old Crow Basin, suggesting human activity around 36,000 BC. These findings were revolutionary. They placed people in the Americas during the height of the Ice Age, a time when massive glaciers were thought to have made the continent inaccessible from the north. The old story was beginning to crumble under the weight of this new evidence. The implications of these discoveries were profound. If people were living in North America 40,000 years ago, they could not have used the ice-free corridor from the Bering Strait, because it did not exist at that time. This meant they must have arrived by a different route, or at a much, much earlier time. These ancient sites forced scientists to think outside the box and consider alternative possibilities. Perhaps early humans had traveled down the Pacific coast in small boats, hopping from island to island. Or perhaps, and this was the most radical idea of all, they had not come from Asia at all, but from somewhere else entirely. The very foundation of American archaeology was being shaken. These new sites did more than just add years to the timeline. They added complexity and mystery to the story of the first Americans. They suggested that the peopling of the Americas was not a single swift event, but a long and drawn-out process involving multiple waves of migration from potentially different parts of the world. The simple story was being replaced by a richer, more intricate tapestry of human history. The continent was not an empty wilderness waiting to be discovered 12,000 years ago. It was a land that had been home to people for an immense span of time, a place with a history far deeper and more fascinating than anyone had previously dared to believe. While stunning discoveries were being made in North America, the most powerful challenges to the old theory were emerging from thousands of miles to the south. In the heart of Brazil, a series of rock shelters known as Pedra Furada revealed evidence so ancient it was almost unbelievable. Here, French and Brazilian archaeologists led by Nita Guidon uncovered what they identified as stone tools and charcoal from ancient campfires buried in deep layers of sediment. The dates from these layers were staggering, with some suggesting human presence as far back as 45,000 BC. The shelters also contained breathtaking rock paintings, some of which were dated to around 22,000 years ago, depicting animals and human figures in vibrant red pigments, a testament to a long and rich cultural history. The findings at Pedra Furada were intensely controversial. Many mainstream archaeologists, particularly in North America, argued that the tools were just naturally broken rocks, or geofacts, and that the charcoal was from natural brush fires, not human-made hearths. But the team at Pedra Ferrada stood by their evidence, pointing to the patterns of the stone fractures and the deliberate placement of the hearths. If they were right, it meant that people were living in South America at a time when Neanderthals still roamed Europe. This discovery turned the entire migration model on its head. How could people be in Brazil so long before they supposedly crossed the Bering Strait? It was a puzzle that defied the old explanation. Further south in Chile, another site provided the final decisive blow to the Clovis first model. At Monteverde, a team led by American archaeologist Tom Dillahay excavated the miraculously preserved remains of an ancient settlement on the banks of a small creek. The waterlogged soil had preserved organic materials that almost never survive, including wooden tent stakes, bits of animal hide, and even the footprint of a child. The inhabitants of Monteverde had hunted mastodons, gathered edible plants, and used medicinal herbs. The site was dated to approximately 14,500 years ago, a full millennium before the first Clovis people appeared in North America. After years of intense scrutiny, Monteverde was finally accepted by the scientific community in the late 1990s, officially ending the reign of the Clovis first theory. The evidence from Pedra Ferrada and Monteverde was revolutionary. It proved beyond a reasonable doubt that people were in South America long before the supposed migration through the ice-free corridor. In fact, some of the oldest and most compelling evidence for human settlement was being found at the very bottom of the hemisphere. This geographic reality led some bold thinkers to propose a radical new idea. What if the story we had been telling was not just wrong, but completely backward? What if the Americas had been settled not from north to south, but from south to north? It was a mind-bending proposition that opened the door to even more extraordinary possibilities about who the first Americans truly were. The discovery of extremely ancient sites in South America, predating those in the north, sparked a fascinating and revolutionary hypothesis: the south-to-north migration theory. This idea suggests that the first chapter of human history in the Americas may have begun not in Alaska, but in Brazil or Chile. According to this model, the earliest people arrived on the South American continent first, and then, over thousands of years, gradually expanded their populations northward. This expansion would have followed the slow retreat of the massive glaciers that covered much of North America during the Ice Age. As the ice melted and new lands opened up, these ancient peoples would have moved into them from the south. This theory offers a compelling explanation for the chronological puzzle presented by sites like Pedra Ferrada and Monteverde. If people had to wait for an ice-free corridor to open in Canada around 13,000 years ago, it would be impossible for them to be living in Chile 14,500 years ago. But if they arrived in South America directly, the timeline makes perfect sense. But, this raises an even bigger question. If they didn't come from Asia via the Bering Strait, where did they come from? Proponents of this theory point to the most logical origin for a transatlantic journey in the ancient world: Africa. They suggest that ancient Africans may have crossed the Atlantic Ocean, which was actually narrower at the time, landing on the shores of Brazil. Now, the idea of an ancient transatlantic voyage might sound like science fiction, but we must remember the world was a different place 50,000 years ago. Ocean currents and wind patterns could have facilitated a journey in rudimentary watercraft, maybe even unintentionally. Small groups of coastal people, expert in marine environments, could have been swept across the Atlantic. This theory connects the peopling of the Americas to the great out-of-Africa migrations that populated the rest of the world. It suggests that while some groups of humans were moving into Europe and Asia, others may have made the journey west, becoming the first to set foot in the so-called New World. This south-to-north model, honestly, challenges us to completely reimagine the settlement of the Americas. Instead of a single group of hunters moving down from the north, it pictures a continent populated from multiple directions over a vast period of time. It envisions an ancient America that was home to a diverse population long before we previously thought possible. The northward expansion would have been a slow, generational process, with people adapting to new environments as the climate warmed. This theory, while still debated, provides a powerful framework for understanding the growing body of evidence that points to a very deep and very complex human presence in South America. It opens the door to a story of origins that is truly global. Perhaps the most compelling and personal evidence for an ancient African presence in the Americas comes not from stone tools, but from the very bones of the people who lived there. In Brazil, in the same region known for its ancient sites, archaeologists discovered the skull of a young woman who died around 12,000 years ago. They named her Luzia. When scientists reconstructed her facial features based on the skull's structure, they were astonished. Luzia did not look like the modern Native Americans who are descended from Siberian populations. Instead, her features, a narrow face, a projecting jaw, and wide-set eyes, were consistent with those of modern indigenous Australians, Melanesians, or sub-Saharan Africans. She was what anthropologists call Australoid or Negroid in type. Dr. Walter Neves, a leading Brazilian anthropologist, studied Luzia's skull extensively and concluded that she belonged to a population of people who were biologically different from the ancestors of today's Amerindians. He proposed that the Americas were first settled by a wave of people who looked like Luzia, and only later by a second wave of people with Mongoloid features from Northeast Asia. Luzia's face, staring at us from across 12 millennia, provides a powerful human connection to this lost chapter of history. She was not an abstract idea or a disputed artifact. She was a person, and her skull tells a story of origins that radically challenges the old narrative. The scholar Marquez stated in 1956 that long ago, the youthful America was also a Negro continent, and Luzia's existence seems to support this claim. Incredibly, Luzia is not alone. In 2007, deep inside a submerged cave system on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, divers discovered another stunningly complete and ancient skeleton. This one belonged to a teenage girl who had fallen into the cave some 12,000 to 13,000 years ago. She was named Naya. Like Luzia, Naya's skull showed features that were distinct from modern Native Americans. While her DNA linked her to the later Siberian migrations, her physical structure, her cranial morphology, pointed to a different ancestral source. Some scholars have classified her skull as belonging to the Negro racial category, adding another piece to the puzzle. Naya and Luzia together are the oldest known human remains in the Americas, and both tell a similar complex story. The discoveries of Luzia and Naya are monumental because they separate physical appearance from the genetic markers we often associate with geography today. They suggest that the first people to inhabit the Americas were a diverse group and may have included populations that we would today identify as Black or African in appearance. These were not people who arrived in the medieval period, as suggested by other theories like Ivan van Sertima's about the Mali Empire. These were Ice Age people, the true pioneers of the continent. Their faces force us to confront the possibility that the very first Americans were of African and Australoid stock, people who settled these lands long before the ancestors of today's Native Americans arrived from Asia. The revolutionary ideas of an ancient African presence and a south-to-north migration have, understandably, sparked a great deal of debate among scientists. History is not written in stone, and new theories must be rigorously tested against all available evidence. One of the most pointed questions raised by skeptics, such as the archaeologist C. Vance Haynes, is a simple one. If people have been in the Americas for 30,000, 40,000, or even more years, why are there so few ancient sites? If a continent was populated for that long, shouldn't we be tripping over artifacts everywhere we dig? This is a fair and important challenge that researchers are actively trying to answer. One possible answer is that the earliest populations were extremely small and nomadic. These were not large, settled societies, but tiny, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers who left a very light footprint on the landscape. Finding the scant remains of a single campfire or a handful of tools from 40,000 years ago is incredibly difficult, like finding a needle in a continental haystack. Furthermore, much of the ancient coastline where these people might have lived is now underwater. As the Ice Age ended and the glaciers melted, sea levels rose dramatically, submerging the very lands that would hold the most clues. The scarcity of sites might not mean a scarcity of people, but rather that we have been looking in the wrong places. Another part of the debate revolves around the nature of the artifacts themselves. At very ancient sites like Pedra Furada, the tools are often simple, consisting of fractured pebbles and flakes. Skeptics argue these could have been created by natural processes, like rocks falling from a cliff face. However, proponents argue that the patterns of fracture and the context in which these stones are found, alongside charcoal and in sheltered areas, point strongly to human creation. This debate highlights the immense challenge of interpreting evidence from the deep past. It requires meticulous work and a willingness to consider all possibilities, separating what was made by a human hand from what was shaped by the hand of nature. The scientific process thrives on such debates. Scholars like P.S. Martin and R.G. Klein have noted the rich fossil record in South America and wondered if the earliest hunters were simply overlooked in North America because everyone was so focused on finding Clovis sites. Every question, every critique, pushes researchers to find better evidence and refine their methods. The puzzle of the first Americans is far from solved, but the debate itself is a sign of a healthy and vibrant field of study. It is through this process of questioning, arguing, and discovering that we slowly peel back the layers of the past and move closer to a true understanding of our shared origins. The evidence for an ancient African presence in the Americas is not limited to stones and bones. Some of the most intriguing clues can be found in something less tangible but equally profound: language. The great Senegalese historian and anthropologist Cheikh Anta Diop was a pioneer in this field. He dedicated his life to uncovering the deep historical and cultural connections between Africa and the rest of the world. Diop pointed out fascinating similarities between ancient Egyptian and his own native language, Wolof. But he also turned his attention to the Americas, suggesting that the linguistic roots of some indigenous American languages might stretch all the way back to Africa, carried by the continent's first inhabitants. One of Diop's most cited examples is the word for canoe or boat. He noted a striking phonetic similarity between the word used in Wolof and other languages in the Senegambian region of West Africa and the words used for the same object in several pre-Columbian languages in the Americas. While a single word can be a coincidence, linguists look for patterns of systematic correspondence across entire vocabularies and grammatical structures. The idea that the very first languages spoken in the Americas belong to the same family as some African languages is a powerful one, suggesting a shared origin deep in time. It implies that these connections predate Columbus by tens of thousands of years. This line of inquiry proposes that if the first Americans were of African origin, it is logical that they would have brought their languages with them. Over millennia, these ancient mother tongues would have evolved and diversified into the vast array of languages spoken across the Americas, creating what is known as the Amerindian family of languages. While this is a difficult theory to prove definitively, as languages change and disappear over time, the tantalizing clues remain. They suggest a layer of linguistic history that has been largely overlooked, a deep African substratum hidden beneath the languages that came later. Exploring these linguistic connections requires an open mind and a deep respect for the cultural knowledge of both African and indigenous American peoples. It is a field that challenges the traditional separation of world histories and instead weaves them together. The work of scholars like Cheikh Anta Diop and later, Ivan van Sertima, who focused on more recent medieval African contact, encourages us to look for these echoes of the past. They remind us that culture is carried in our words and that the languages we speak are living artifacts, holding clues to journeys and connections that happened long ago, linking continents in a shared human story. The story of the first Americans is no longer a simple linear tale of hunters crossing a land bridge. It has blossomed into a magnificent, sprawling epic with multiple beginnings, diverse peoples, and profound mysteries that we are only just beginning to unravel. New discoveries, from the ancient hearts of Pedra Furada to the revealing face of Luzia, have shattered the old certainties and opened our eyes to a deeper, more complex past. We now know that people have called the Americas home for a time so vast it challenges our imagination. The evidence strongly suggests that among these pioneers were people of African and Australoid descent, the true first peoples of this hemisphere. This new understanding does not erase the story of the migrations from Asia across the Bering Strait. Instead, it enriches it. It adds earlier chapters to the great book of American history, creating a narrative that is more inclusive and more accurate. The peopling of the Americas was clearly a long and complex process, involving different groups of people arriving at different times and from different directions. Recognizing the potential for an ancient African presence honors a forgotten chapter of human resilience and exploration, and acknowledges that the roots of the American family tree are sunk deep in global soil, connecting us all in unexpected ways. As we move forward, it is essential that we approach this history with a spirit of curiosity, respect, and humility. The story belongs to everyone, and it is still being written. The ongoing work of archaeologists, geneticists, linguists, and historians, especially those from indigenous and African diaspora communities, will continue to add new pages and fresh perspectives. Institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art are already updating their galleries to reflect this more complex and accurate timeline, moving beyond old labels and embracing a more hemispheric and continuous history. This is a sign of great progress, a willingness to let the evidence lead us toward a more truthful account of the past. Ultimately, the untold story of the America's first inhabitants is a powerful reminder that our shared human history is full of surprises. It teaches us to question what we think we know and to celebrate the complexity of our origins. It shows us that the human family has always been on the move, driven by courage and curiosity to explore new worlds. By embracing this richer, more diverse narrative, we gain a deeper appreciation for the incredible tapestry of cultures that have shaped the Americas. It is a story that inspires us to keep digging, keep questioning, and keep searching for the truth of who we are and where we all come from.